We are excited this morning to talk today about discipleship and rethinking the ways that we pass faith on to the next generation. It's a pretty strong biblical command that we are to instill faith into those coming up behind us, and all of you play critical roles in that. And so we're really excited for this conversation. My name is Rebecca. I am the Director of Training and Strategy for Youth Ministry Consultants. We are an organization dedicated to helping people like you communicate the gospel with clarity and passion, and especially if you are serving in a smaller church. We want to see you thrive in the ministry that you have been called to, whether you're serving 20 kids or 5 kids or 2 kids. We think all of that work matters. And so that's why we're here. Tiger is our founder and executive director. He's been in youth ministry for over 40 years, has been my mentor for more years than I want to admit publicly. And brings so much to this conversation after working with churches of all sizes, all regions, all areas. He's seen a lot. And so he's compiled these 7 faith factors that really have been shown to make a difference in kids walking with the Lord long term. And so we are excited to have him with us today. So Tiger, take it away.
Great. Excuse me. It's good to be here this morning. I'm in a little chilly Minnesota here and got a little bit of a cold. Excuse me. Hopefully that won't be a problem the whole way. Yeah, I've been hanging around youth ministry for a long time. And I always say when I started, I was young, cool, and relevant and kind of hung out with kids and it was easy. And then the gap between my world and their world got bigger and bigger. And now I'm at a stage where I walk in a room and they wonder why the homeless old guy is showing up in the room. And it's kind of part of my ministry. I've always wrestled with a question from the early days in the basement of the church where I worked in Duluth, Minnesota. A simple question that has profoundly shaped most of my life, which is, will our children have faith? Will the next generation come to know a truth that can set them free? And will that encounter with God that we are a part of when they're a teenager, will it last into their adult life? I early on started to watch what many of us have seen. Kids will participate in things and then you don't recognize them spiritually in 2 years. And so this question just started to bubble up, and it's just been my life pursuit of asking that question, helping churches ask that question, that we just don't keep doing the things that we've always done, but we keep the why behind it right front and center. And I know everyone sitting in this thing who take time away from their busy schedule to sit in on a webinar, either live or later, are people like me who are concerned about that. I don't have to sell you on that. I don't have to try to convince you that it's important to share faith next generation. But at the same time, I hear this from parents, I hear it from churches all the time. We just hope our kids turn out well. We hope they stay in the church. We hope they stay engaged. And so what I want to do is just share some thoughts about that. And the main thing I always say, and it's a phrase I've said a lot over the years, which is that hope is not a strategy. God bless you for the feeling. It's good to hope. I'm not talking about biblical hope in Jesus. I'm talking about this vague kind of, I just hope things turn. I hope I get an A on the test. I hope my kids turn out well. I hope our youth ministry works. We have to think more strategically than that, especially in today's world. So I'm going to share some, background context, and then I want to get at 7 faith factors. And what I want to do in this thing with the 7 faith factors is share with you something that for over the last 30 some years, I've heard this statistic, a variation of the statistic, that we're losing 40 to 50 to 60%. Now I heard someone say 75%. I don't know where they all get the numbers, but we're losing a significant number of kids who come to youth group, and I call it the critical decade. The critical decade is 13 to 23. I believe that in that critical decade, that's when we will see evidence as parents and as churches as to whether what we've done bears fruit or not. So many kids, whatever that percentage, enter that decade at 13 saying that they're a Christian, identifying with a denomination, identifying with a church. And a huge percentage of them exit that decade at 23, disconnected to faith, to church, to any identity in Jesus. And that's a concern that I've had for many years. And so I'm going to share with you, there have been lots of books about who's left, what they say about the church, why they're critical of the church, etc. What I've been doing for over 30 years is asking the question of 21 to 35-year-olds, why didn't you leave? I want to talk to those who have stuck around, who have remained engaged. And these 7 faith factors are what I've heard in the stories of people over these years. So the context is this. I think we need to always develop, when we come to discussions about discipleship, have a long-term focus. And Jim Burns wrote this many, many years ago. It's a great little quote. The bottom line of youth ministry isn't how many kids you have coming, which is why we love serving smaller churches, to remind them of that. It doesn't matter that you maybe only have 5, but where will they be in 5 to 10 years? A massive youth group that has 75% exit strategy, and that kids are bailing because it doesn't build any roots, is way less effective than a small church that builds roots in kids. So we're going to keep talking about what does a long-term focus look like. And the context that you and I are in is completely changed, hasn't it? I mean, we could do this could be the whole workshop. That adolescence has gotten messier, it's gotten longer, it's been impacted by culture. We can talk all about the ways in which that happens, but culture is winning when it comes to the souls of our teenagers in a variety of ways, which is very concerning. And there we get into that statistic of how many we're losing. And one of the things we find in a variety of studies is that the theology that kids are receiving, what they're believing, what they're picking up, tends to be kind of vague, sort of like a little bit of Bible and a little bit of God is love, and maybe that's about it. A friend of mine said this. He said, a pastor of a church, he said, my concern about my church is that I think we're raising activists, not disciples, which was an interesting observation, that maybe it's just people who are somewhat aware of things and very socially active, environmentally conscious, and all those things are important. But what he's saying is there's not a lot of faith perspective to their context. And so I have another phrase I say a lot, which is vagueness is killing the church. A vague theology, vague discipleship, vague strategy as parents, vagueness tends to not produce much in terms of roots of discipleship. So that's the sense of context here. Everything's changing. Vagueness is maybe winning the day. We had Kara Powell on here, and she's talked about the 3 questions kids are asking. And I joked with her later that I have PowerPoint that says the same 3 questions from years ago. We're on the same track. I love her new book. But just a reminder, as we're doing discipleship, kids are asking 3 questions. Who am I? Which is that identity question. And that has really changed even the language around that. But who am I? Of all the options in front of me, how am I going to figure out who am I? And these are both theological questions. They're also the ways in which sociology and individuals help them with that. But then also, whose am I, which is a belonging question. And I think Mark Oestreicher said in one of ours that he's thinking that, and I agree with him, that belonging may be the driving one right now. Kids are looking for some place where they feel that they belong. And these really will challenge us if we're serious about discipleship. That it's not just theology, it's how do we help kids in their identity? How do we help them feel like they belong? And do I matter, which is purpose. These things are essential and are, like I said, are theological for sure. And then we got to be not vague about this. We got to help them understand their identity as a child of God. We have to help them understand their belonging in the body of Christ and the particular group that you run. And they need to find a purpose that God has given them, but also that you can help them understand. These are essential things. And parallel to this, and kind of jump along with it, I say it all the time, that every teenager, every child, every adult needs to know they're loved, valuable, and not alone. And they'll do all kinds of stuff to try to get those two things, that who am I, whose am I, and do I matter question answered, and this loved, valuable, not alone thing. They correlate. But that's why kids will make all kinds of choices to try to figure this out. And our job, I believe, as caring, loving, faithful adults, is to walk alongside of them as they're wrestling with this. And the length of time it's taken to figure these out has gotten longer and longer in our culture. They need us. I mean, I'm just trying to remind you of something you already know. They need us to help them both theologically as well as in other ways, know that they're loved, they're valuable, and they're not alone. And that's a critical piece. And so just be aware of those things. Those three questions and those three needs are part of the struggle of every kid, and our discipleship has to really pay attention to those, the way in which those are tripping people up, the way the culture is trying to answer those, and the way in which we want God to answer those questions. And in the process, then we do discipleship stuff. And I always say, be careful that when we're doing discipleship, or even talking about it, that we're really talking about a growth in the spiritual life of people, not just learning church language. I grew up outside the church, and it didn't take me long after I started to, get connected to Jesus to realize there's this church language, and I just got to learn that language, and then I'll be good. And we got to be careful that that's not what discipleship is, that it's not just teaching kids a church kind of language. It's about actual growth in their spiritual lives. And the way I say it is, we got to be careful, watch out for what I call casual holiness and Sunday school answers. What I mean by that is, casual holiness is the ability to look spiritual, even if nothing is really going on down below. And by the way, all of us as leaders have to admit this is a trip point for us. We get really good at looking like we got it figured out. We know the answer. We can pray and command. We can worship. We can do this. And if we're not careful, that starts to define our spiritual life, our casual ability to do spiritual stuff versus a real in-depth, growing relationship with the God of the universe. And I've wrestled with this one a lot because I'm really good at faking it. And casual holiness is something that any of us who've been around the church for a while can do pretty easily. So be careful about that in our own lives, but also in the lives of our students. And the ability to have that church language, Sunday school answers. So, and the last thing I want to say before we get to the faith factors is that sometimes I've found that discipleship is really based on some things. And I'm going to give you a list. And by the way, I'm going to tell you, I believe in everything on this list. I just did this with a church adult Bible class in my church Sunday, and we had this great conversation about, we all believe in this, but if this becomes the only way we define discipleship, it might not be the real thing. So for example, I think sometimes we define discipleship, but just by attendance. Those who attend the most are the most serious in their faith. We make an assumption that attendance equals spiritual depth. And I'm sure you have known kids that, like I have, who kind of were there every time the church doors were open. They came to everything. They came at every retreat. But then they went away, and I can't recognize them spiritually in a year or two because they're starting to attend a whole nother group. And it wasn't about, their attendance wasn't about something going on in their spiritual life. It was all about relationships, which is always a mixed bag, and I get it. So be careful that we don't get casual with the kids who are there a lot, thinking, well, they must be going deep. They might just be really social kids and what you're doing, and they like you and they like the girl down the hallway. And so we go for that. So the second one is compliance. I love compliant kids. If any of you are parents of a compliant kid, thank God for that. That's wonderful. But in and of itself, compliance does not define a serious relationship with Jesus. It just might simply be a kid who's really good with that social antenna, that in this group, if I do this, they'll like me. Remember those three needs: love, valuable, not alone. They'll like me if I do that. So I'm going to be really compliant. And I've known kids who are incredibly compliant, but then they go to a state college 200 miles away from home, and they get compliant with a whole nother group their freshman year, and it's got nothing to do with faith, and you simply don't even recognize them spiritually in a year, because their definer was not a relationship with God. It was a relationship with the people that I want them to like me. And again, let's be honest, I think anybody in ministry has probably got people pleasing tendency in them. We want people to like us. If we weren't, we wouldn't be in ministry. We'd probably be an IRS auditor or something like that. I said that once in a volunteer training, and a guy came up to me afterwards and said, "I'm an IRS auditor." I was like, "I'm really sorry." But anyway, compliance is a good thing, but it may not be a definer of their spiritual life. That's what I'm just trying to say. The third is, again, the worksheet. Just knowing the answers, filling in the blank. In this class was fun. I had an outline, and half the class were taking notes, and the other half were just listening. And I said, of course, I can tell that half of you are really serious disciples because you're taking notes, and the other half, I'm worried. And of course, we laughed, talked about that in and of itself, knowing the worksheet may help, but it isn't the whole thing. So again, remember, I'm all for taking notes. Fourthly, agreement, just being an agreeable person, agreeing with the theology presented in small group, agreeing with what's being said, may be a reflection of what they are saying, thinking, but it might be something else too. Number 5 is externals, meaning that we look good. We comply with the right clothes, we comply with the right language, is a good external behavior. We carry the right Bible, whatever it is. And we do that all. Sometimes it's part of that. And by the way, I think our faith should show up in our external life. People try to tell me that they're serious about their faith, that everything in their external life doesn't tell me that. Then it's kind of like Jesus talking about fruit of a tree. There is fruit. So again, remember, I agree with everything on the list. I think our external life should reflect our internal spiritual life, but just having a nice external life doesn't indicate necessarily depth of my spiritual life. And the last one is what I think Dallas Willard might have said years ago, called sin management. That a disciple just manages their sin better. We're not as messy as people who aren't certain. And yeah, that's, again, I think that's part of the deal. But I've known people who fake it well, and it's not there. So I give this list just to remind each of us that when we're thinking about discipleship of the next generation, having kids attend, I don't think you grow spiritually by yourself. I think you do need to be involved. We'll talk about that. I think these things are part of it, but I've fallen prey to just, the kid's always here. The kid's agreeable. They're not obviously sinning right here, so they're good. And I've missed the chance to pay attention to the right kid, or ask a harder question, or help them go deeper in their spiritual life versus assume their casual holiness represents what's true. So if you have any thoughts about this, these are discipleship markers. If you have any thoughts on that, throw that in the chat room, or ask a question, and we'll pick up at the end. I want to stop and chat with you about this. But I think we all kind of make our own kind of markers. If you have other markers that either are inaccurate or you think are good markers that help you as a person trying to build faith, throw that into the chat room. I would like to steal anything good from any of you, so feel free to help me with that. So the issue for me when I think about discipleship, because by the way, discipleship has kind of become a church word. The problem I have with it a little bit is it feels like a product. We're going to build a disciple. We're going to make a disciple. We're going to do discipleship, so that it kind of is like you go in a shop and you build something. And our spiritual lives are way messier. So a phrase that I've used for me, whether you want to use it or not, it's up to you, is I like the issue of helping every person become a lifelong follower of Jesus. Here's 3 reasons why I like the phrase. Becoming is a process word. Becoming says we're all on this journey. We're hopefully where I am in my spiritual life in a year from now isn't exactly the same as where I am. I'm becoming something. We call it sanctification in the theological frame, but it's a becoming word. I like that it's not a I became, I'm done, we're there. but all of us are in the process of becoming. Secondly, it's a becoming process that is the full journey of our life, not just while we're kids. That all of us who are disciplers need to be continuing to grow in our faith. So it helps me not get lazy. That as long as I'm this side of heaven, my job is to continue to process what it means to be a lifelong, and then that simple phrase, follower of Jesus. Keep the main thing the main thing. There are a whole lot of other ways to describe it. I tend to like the idea of looking in the Gospels when Jesus looks at people and says, hey, follow me. Two simple words, which are incredibly complicated to do and confusing along the journey. But I keep coming back to that. What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to follow Jesus? You know, what did it mean when I was 30? What did it mean when I was 50? What does it mean when I'm getting really to become an old geezer? What does that mean? If I don't ask that question, I simply can get lazy and do that. I've been there, done that. I know the answer to that. But if I keep asking the question, what does it mean to follow Jesus today in this world? Then I'm going to ask a whole different set of questions. So that's why, for me, it's been helpful as I look at people, as I talk to people, as I wrestle with people about their faith life. That has helped me. If it helps you, great. But just want to share that with you. So now I want to throw into the 7 faith factors. Listening to people over the last 30 some years, I asked them, what was it that you think helped you? I'm going to give you the 7. It's not a formula. In other words, don't think if you got 5, you're done. You don't have to worry about it. Or if you're working with a kid who has 1, you give up, walk away. It's all over. Never is a formula. Partly because at 18, I probably would tell you I'd have a half a faith factor. So I wasn't the prime case of saying this is how you help a kid disciple. Now, all of them have been part of my life since that. Then 18 years old is when I started to follow Jesus. But because I grew up in a non-church family, I grew up with a chaotic, painful family. So I didn't have a lot of stuff. I've also worked with kids, and I tell parents, hang in there, you never know. So let me give you the 7, and I want your thoughts, comments, so I can shape this. First one, this is the one we say a lot. It's family of origin. I listen to so many people say, and if we raised our hands in this room, how many of you had at least one parent who was a faithful Christian example to you? We'd have a vast majority of people raise their hand. I couldn't raise my hand, but a lot of people do. What I did this in class Sunday, and one woman came up to me afterwards and said, because what I say afterwards when people raise their hand if they had a Christian parent, is I say, you're not normal. If you did that statistic in America, in just a general room in America today, you'd find fewer and fewer people saying, I have a really solid Christian parent in my family. And I just joked, I said, that you're not normal. And those of you who didn't raise your hand, maybe the first time you've heard, you're kind of normal, it's okay. She came up to me afterwards saying, I've always felt less than when I've been around people in the church because they talk about their family of origin and they have these nice faith stories tied in. She said, I have 0. So it was really fun to talk to her about that. But let's be honest, family of origin is a huge influence. It's what I call an uncontrollable variable, meaning you and I can't change it. We can whine about it all we want, but it is huge. Now, if we're just going to talk about parent ministry to parents, I'd talk about how you and I have to pay attention to. There are some solid Christian parents you're working with, but there's also going to be what I call spiritual parents, meaning they're interested in their kids' spiritual life. When you try to tell them, like a lot of us do, the new model of youth and family ministry is parents are the primary faith influencers in their children's life, and our job in the church is to support them. I agree with the philosophy, Deuteronomy chapter 6, but guess what? Not every parent in your church is 100% committed to that. So the spiritual parents would be interested, but their primary feeling when you give them that theology and that philosophy is inadequacy. They're like, I don't know how to do devotions. I don't know how to pray in public. A lot of these parents are in their 40s, late 30s, early 40s. They're parenting. Their faith has not grown an inch since they were in confirmation. And now all of a sudden they're feeling a little guilty and they feel like we should do something for our kids. What they want to do is run them to you so that you do it all because they feel inadequate. And we can tell them that that's not the right order. But until we equip them for their job, we're only making them feel guilty. So that's a whole nother seminar. And then you've got the third category I call it, which is your drop-off parents. They don't have much in their faith life or any, but they'll give you permission to work with their kids. By the way, that was me. So don't quit working with those kids. They need to hear Jesus. So family of origin is a nice intro. In one respect, I put it like a bookshelf, 6 books or 7 books. First one is family of origin. But let's not make it so simple, because the seminar leader told us that we should just tell our parents, you do it, I'm going to help you, because it's not that easy. It is a critically important one, and I'll never quit telling that, but don't make it simple. It's not. It's really messy. So we'll talk about that. Family of origin, huge part of their story. The second one I call sacred memories. I listen to these stories of people who haven't left, and they start to talk about some experience with God, that God is both objective truth, but also, I'm not getting charismatic on you, it's some experience. I call it when God shows up in their world. God breaks through. And they'll talk about when at camp something happened, or on a mission trip, or on a weekend retreat, or maybe in a difficult time at grandma's funeral. Or I listened to the variety of ways when God used these things and broke into the person's consciousness. And that consciousness of the experience of God was one of the things that I do believe the more of these you have, the greater resistance you have to the dropout. Doesn't guarantee it, but there's a resistance. And what I heard people say was, yeah, when I started to, doubt and wonder, but I still had this memory of when I was so sure. It made sense. And so I think what we can do, we can't make this happen. I've tried to make it happen, by the way. You schedule God for Thursday, because that's when you want God to show up. But sometimes I think what the phrase I would say is, our job as ministry people is to try to set the table for a sacred memory, meaning get the kid on the retreat, get him to camp. I'm talking to one of my kids right now about, we want to pay for their kids to go to camp. It's expensive. And he's like, I don't think we can afford it. And I said, well, that's why we want to help you. Why? In my brain, because camp is a great place for sacred memories. I still have a sacred memory of me under a tree in Silver Cliff Ranch in Colorado at a Young Life camp 2 weeks after graduating from high school. No manipulation, no formula. He just said, we're going to be quiet in the camp for 15 or 20 minutes. Go talk to God and see what happens. And I sat under a tree by myself, and I was, in a non-spiritual way, basically saying, if this is true, if you are who they say you are, then I'm in. And I just kind of mumbled a sacred memory for me. So this summer, I'm going to be riding my motorcycle in the Colorado mountains. And guess what? I'm going to Silver Cliff, because I want to go I won't find the exact tree, but I'll go sit under a tree and thank God that God broke through to this messy kid 50 years ago. That's a sacred, you can't take that from me. Huge. We all might have our own. And I've loved listening to the stories of people tell me what encounter with God still is in their mind. Here's a ministry trick. Help kids notice these. Don't just let them have one and sit by themselves with it. That's why I believe in debriefing at camp, debrief and mission trip. Talk to kids, get them into small groups, so that you can help them have this moment that this wasn't just a good feeling. This might have been the actual encounter. So, for example, you on a retreat or mission trip, a middle school boy will say, "Oh, today was awesome." Yeah, great. Yeah, tell me about it. What was so good about it? I don't know. It was just like, it was awesome. He doesn't know, he doesn't have a lot of spiritual language, but the job of the adult is to spend time so that he can unpack it and say, I don't know what it was. It was, for the first time, my anxiety didn't win. I felt a peace that I've not felt. I felt calm. I felt, I felt like God was with me. Oh, really? Tell me more. Get them to notice it, because by talking about it, there's a little brain stuff. When your mouth says something and your own ears hear the processing of information that you've shared, it's more real than when it's just in your little middle school brain. Because lots of stuff goes through a middle school brain, right? If our job is to slow it down so we can process and get them to say it out loud, and you can help them with that, I would argue that helps seal the sacred memory, so that when that kid wanders when they're in college, it'll haunt them in a good way. I mean, I was haunted by that Silver Cliff thing when I tripped up freshman year, not in a bad way, but in a way like, wait a minute. Everyone says it just caused me to have a spiritual disconnect that was where God could meet me again. So sacred memories are huge. I hear them all the time. Fun to listen to. So that's number 2. Number 3 is authentic community. This is what we talk about a lot. This is the belonging piece. Positive peer group, real relationships. It's about finding these spots where, especially in transition periods, which is elementary school to middle school to high school, and by the way, high school to college, to help them find these communities, so that if their faith is both real but also people pleasing, which is a trap with mixed messages, that we're helping them build the authentic community. Because I always tell kids, you can't grow completely on, you need a community. And you tend to grow best when you're with people who are growing spiritually. I mean, that's just kind of a principle of spiritual growth. So for college ministry, campus ministry is really crucial. Holy Youth Institute did a deal a while ago, I can't remember which one it was, where they said that their studies show that the first 2 weeks of a kid's college experience tends to set their spiritual trajectory for their next few years. And think about Welcome Week for most of us in college. It wasn't that good. It wasn't real spiritual, because we don't equip kids for what that's going to really look like. We don't help them think through. And I always say this to those of you who have a really good youth ministry. Sometimes you're the worst help for a kid leaving a youth group. Why? Because you've done such a great job for them. They can't replicate that when they go to, whatever college they go to. We haven't taught them how to find a church. And if they're not in the same denomination, if I grew up Covenant and there's not a Covenant church within a half a mile of campus or a mile, can I go to a Baptist church? Can I go to Lutheran church? What do I do? We haven't even talked to them about that, so that they're on their own. And what will happen? It will be that they won't make a decision. So now they're 4 months into it and they haven't stepped into any authentic faith community. We have to really help with this one, because we can't assume that they know how to do the skills to find one, grow in it, move into it. So I'm speaking at a senior banquet on Sunday, and we'll wrestle with all of these faith factors. The way I do it with the senior banquet is 5 things you can do to guarantee your faith will suck by Thanksgiving. So we talk about it on the flip side, that it's more interesting to kids and all the parents are offended. It's wonderful. So authentic community, huge. We do it, we say it, but we have to be really intentional about it, because it is the environment that produces the opportunity for spiritual growth. Number 4 is where the content comes in, which is the Bible, duh. But guess what? My friend who said our church is raising activists, not disciples, is admitting that when he looks at what they call discipleship, it's got very little Bible. And that's what we need to help them know. And I know that when you say we're going to do a Bible study, the average kid's not going to go, woohoo, I can't wait, this is the best thing in the world. But we have to figure out, we can be creative in how we do it, but don't give up on making this a core value. And in my books, this is the middle one. It's right in the middle of saying this is a discipleship without a biblical foundation has very few roots. What I say to people is, it's sort of like, if I don't know, it's not about oughta, gotta, shoulda, or there's a quiz in heaven. But if the Bible has these spiritual promises and spiritual truths and spiritual insights that we say it has, then if I don't know those, if I don't have access to them, if I don't know how to find them, then they may as well not be there, because I will not lean into them. I will not have access. So we have to help them know. Each of you will do it in your own way, but please don't give up. It's a huge faith factor. As I listened to kids who didn't wander, they talked about the Bible as being part of their training, part of their equipping, part of their present reality. So that's number 4. Number 5 is what I call engagement. Engagement is early leadership, early service, places, intentional places. And I think we move from consumer faith to discipleship, which is a purpose thing. Do I matter? Yes, you matter. Why do I matter? It's a theological thing. God has given you spiritual gifts. We got to teach that, help them understand it, talk about it, give them experiences, practice it, wonder about it. We also need clear opportunities. Again, vagueness is killing the church. This is a big one. We want our kids to serve and learn, but we don't give them specific. We might give a group opportunity, but sometimes it's to look a kid in the eye and go, have you thought about this? You're really good at that. I'd like to give you an opportunity to test that out with me. And whatever that is, it might be behind the scenes, it might be up front, it might be with the young children, it might be with their peers, it might be serving in the community. But our job, I believe, in discipleship is to find these places where they can go from just, as I think it was Raleigh Martinson used to say, button the building theology, just get them to sit there and listen to us, to actually do something. And I think what it requires is somebody has to believe in them. Powerful thing when an adult who this kid trusts looks them in the eye and says, you know what, I really believe in you. You've got some great gifts. And I think the church needs to hear from you or need to see what you're doing. And that's a powerful thing. I still remember a sophomore in high school who, when I did a mission trip to Honduras, I wanted her to be my primary translator. She's like, it's mostly an adult trip. It's not she's like, and you want me to do that? And I said, yeah, you're multilingual, you're great. I don't think I can do that. And we just had to work with the details of finances for the trip, and people supported her. One person gave her $500 for the trip, and she broke into tears. She said, do they really believe that I should go on this trip? I said, absolutely. And I said, Crystal, not only do they believe in you, God believes in you, and I believe in you. But most important, God does. God thinks you've got some things to offer. And to be honest, I don't want to do the trip unless you're my right-hand person. And that changed her spiritual life. But it required some effort to give her an opportunity to hear beyond the voices in her head of saying, oh, I can't do that. I'm not that good. Huge part of it. Therefore, sometimes we have to raise the bar, stretch them, help them be uncomfortable. When we serve on mission trips, I like to make sure we work hard. I've never been a fan of vacation mission trips where we do 2 hours of work and 7 hours of play at the pool. Let's go play at the pool another day, but on service, let's serve, let's stretch, let's be uncomfortable. Let's talk about what that does to us as we actually serve. So that's number 5. A couple more, and then keep asking questions, make comments in the chat. Number 6, I say, guess what? They have to have a safe place to search and wonder. Confusion is part of the discipleship journey. I still get confused. I love Acts 2:12, my life verse maybe. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, what does that mean? It's so great. I just love it. Amazed, meaning in their spiritual life, it was, by the way, it was a sacred memory. They'll never forget this moment when God showed up and fire and tongues. And so, do you think they'd ever go, nah, that wasn't a big deal? Well, yeah, it's a sacred memory. But they're amazed by God, but they also turn into, they're confused, perplexed. They're like, I have no idea what that just was. But the great thing is they did community, safe, searching place. They turned to one another and said, what does that mean? I love that. That's my life. Sometimes God amazes me. I don't get it, but I need friends to help me in the process. If we don't give kids, especially in today's world, as they're really wondering and struggling with these 3 questions of who am I, whose am I, and do I matter? If we don't give them a safe place to search and wonder within the confines of our faith community, they're going to go somewhere else. And then they're going to get a non-God answer to it. Now, I'm not saying that's a wrong answer. I'm just saying our job is to surround them with loving people who give them a safe place to search and wonder. to wrestle and wonder and ask hard questions, and not just get judged because they're struggling, because confusion is rampant in the adolescent years, and it doesn't go away. I'm telling you, when old people still are wondering too, but for sure wondering. Number 7, guess what? There's the end of the bookend. Other adults, this is why we do youth ministry. We call this relational ministry all the time, cross-generational. This is why, yes, family is powerful, but here was my half of faith factor. I had an old guy I liked, and he got me involved. I had the other, maybe one was half of a friend who invited me to youth group. And then all of a sudden it started to follow. But this is what we do. We talk about it. Relation ministry, still a buzzword, by the way, in youth ministry, and we're still trying to figure out what it really means. Caring, loving, intergenerational adults who care. My little acrostic is Christ-centered, available, real, meaning authentic, and encouraging. I tell adult volunteers, if you can just stay true to your own faith, Christ-centered, you're available physically, emotionally, you're available. You're real people, you're authentic, you're messy too, it's okay, but you're an encourager. A lot of discouraging words out there. So we need adults who care. And the old faith or sticky faith 5-1 principle is 5 caring adults around 1 kid. What would that look like if we intentionally asked, what if every child in our church had 5 Christian influences in their life? They suggested that would assist in minimizing the dropout. And when I listened to the stories of people, almost every one of them was naming someone who was a spiritual guide and mentor to them. Sometimes it was a youth pastor. A lot of times it was a volunteer, a Sunday school teacher. I just love listening to the stories of my 72-year-old Sunday school teacher in 5th grade. She just was amazing. And then I was in middle school, every birthday she remembered me and sent me a card. I love that woman. You know, it was just, those are great reminders to us that it's all kinds of people. And it's a sense of being known and cared for by the community, and that's your belonging again. Okay, those are my 7. I don't know if I have the list in front of you. So any thoughts, comments, questions? We have time for some questions here. I've got final thoughts if we need some, but Rebecca, did you get any questions?
Not yet. So feel free to unmute yourself or drop them in the chat. Yeah, I love all of these thoughts. It's I think some of them are ones that we've heard a lot, but always need reminders of, because they're easy to say, but they're hard to implement. And so the more conversations like this we have, the better we get at making this a natural reflex of the way we lead.
And I think part of it is you're right. There's nothing profound here. Anybody who's been in ministry is bumped into or thought about these. What I'm finding in our church I was in before and in the one I'm in now is it gives us some common language when I'm talking with parents and volunteers and staff about how what can the adult ministry department in our church, because we're in a bigger church, how do they deal with the faith factors for adult? By the way, this is adults too, need all of these. What can the children's ministry, what can youth, what can we do with parents? And so it's giving us a common language. It also has found it can give you a way to try to be a little objective in evaluation, to kind of use these and go, so how are we doing in ministering to the families of origin? Since family of origin is value, how are we doing? Are we just assuming they're all people and we're just sending them devotional emails every week, assuming they're doing it? Or are we missing the spiritual parents and the non-Christian parents who really aren't going to read those emails or they'll feel guilty? Or how are we doing in setting the table and responding to kids' encounters with God? How are we doing with the Bible? Have we given up on that one? How are we doing with authentic community and engagement? And so you can look at each one and almost look at 1 to 10. I think we're doing great. And I've used this with youth workers to kind of say, well, really, this is what I didn't realize we're really strong in this one. But we have this one we've kind of let slide. So it can give you a way, again, this is not a formula, but it's a way to kind of look at what you're presently doing and ask the question, do you think it's covering that base? So it is an evaluative tool. It's a common language tool. And that's where we found it very helpful for churches to talk to. about that.
Yeah. And I also love that all of these can happen in churches of all sizes. This does not take budget. It does not take a youth group of 100 kids. This is all things that each of us can do as volunteers, as paid staff,
Yeah.
whatever, however we're showing up for students, we can apply all of these.
Right.
Andy said in the chat, how have you taught this to churches that you've worked with? Is this a parent class framework for a Bible study or an evaluation tool? I think it can be all of the above.
Yeah, good, great question. I'm working on, I've said this now, Andy probably heard this, I'm working this, trying to get this into a book form. But my discipline is so poor that it's not getting there. But so that will be one thing. And in that process, there'll be some evaluation tools to it. But what I'm doing, like in churches, is it's different if it's a one-time deal, or like in my previous church, we started to use common language around the 5-1 principle and some of these other languages. So what I'm doing right now in my church is I've shared this with the staff and the volunteer leadership, the elders, et cetera. And now I'm going into each of the wherever there's an adult group, a small group or a Sunday school class or whatever, and trying to teach these so that, again, the parents, young parents, are having the same language as the parents of the middle school kids. And we're finding that to create some good conversation about it between staff and people in the church. But like I said, it also can be an evaluative tool. I don't have a tool in front of you, but it's a way to look at each one and just ask, how are we doing in that area? It can be a parent can do the same thing. Parents need to ask, how are we strong, or how are we doing in our own family of origin? Parents can be ones that also can help kids notice sacred memories, because kids will sometimes share it after a retreat with a parent, and a parent needs to be paying attention to that. So that's been helpful to parents to realize they can have a role in many of these. When I talk about the function of the family's teaching is in there. So we talk about, I know you may not know a lot about the Bible, but what can you do? And searching, your families need to be a safe place to search as well. So we're trying to wrestle with that with families along the way. That
Yeah,
help?
more conversations like that are always helpful, bringing people onto the same page.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions, things you want to drop in the chat, or unmute yourself? Feel free to ask. Otherwise, Tiger, you have final thoughts for us?
Okay. Yeah, I think the final thoughts are, I just have a couple things I would say at the end of any seminar. And it's a simple phrase. I was in PowerPoint, I don't need to do it. Is something is better than nothing. Now, this is a leadership principle that sounds really silly in one respect, but it's partly for the person here who's got a smaller church, but it's also for a parent who's feeling every night. Do something, because doing something is always better than having good intentions and doing nothing. So I need to work on that in my own life in a number of areas. The second phrase is trust the process. We can make it into a product, and even with listing something, but just trust when you're in ministry alongside of kids and training adults to walk alongside, trust that sometimes some stuff happens that you don't quite see at the retreat. You didn't realize that the sacred memory was there, but the kid will reference it later. So trust it. If you don't see it right away, pray about it, trust it. And then it's similar to the first one, but a phrase stolen from my friend Mike Iaconelli 30 some years ago that's kept me in ministry is always believe in the significance of the insignificant. That, you never quite know what's going to happen. And so I in that regard, I show this sometimes. So there's my little phrases, but here's my insignificant guy, Bob. This was many, many years ago. But Bob was a volunteer, and I didn't know anything, but at that Young Life Club, Bob hung out with me. And when I struggled, my freshman year in college, I went back and he was my safe place to search and wonder. And I asked him tough questions and I admitted mistakes, and he loved me. And yet he loved me, but he also pushed me to pursue Jesus. He pushed me to the Bible. He pushed me to prayer. And I love that tension of loving someone just the way they are, but having a God dream for them, that they could be more, they could be healthier, they could be less anxious, they could, manage that sin a little bit, whatever it is, that he had this nice tension of, hey, I'm not going to freak out and reject you, but hey, the life you've just led is not really a life that we're dreaming on you. And he lived in that tension in a way that I go back to him. He's 89 years old, and I try once a summer to stop by and see him because he's a sacred memory to me. So you guys trust that process. Trust the journey along the way. So I thank you guys for hanging in there. I think some people are thinking that this started at 11 Central Time. And I think someone called me, and I think it's because they maybe had trouble with the link. We had a little bit of techno problems, and the last couple webinars have been at 11 Central Time, and this one is at 10. So I think a little people got confused. So those who just jumped on, thanks for jumping on, but you're going to probably want to watch the recording. So yeah, thanks, Tom.
It'll be available later today.
It will be available.
Before we wrap up, Seth asked a really good question that I'd love to end on.
Okay.
He said, how would you try and equip spiritual or drop-off parents who lack confidence or feel guilty without just ramping up their guilt? I think that's a really common struggle for youth leaders, is
Very
these
common.
parents that just bring kids, but they don't really have any other skin in the game.
And it is one of the common complaints when I'm in a room of youth workers, we complain about drop-off parents. And here's all I would say is, it's my family ministry class, more time with it, it was called Tiger's Totally Unscientific Theory of Thirds, TUT. And so a third of parents are your Christian parents who are, by the way, your partners in ministry. Love them. They fit the D6 model. They'll read our emails. They come to parent meetings. Great. The middle third is what I call them is they're your supporters. They do believe in youth ministry. They want their kids to go to your youth group and have a good time and experience God. They just personally don't feel equipped. So then I'll give you the third one is basically they give you permission to work with their kids. That's all they're doing. So all I would ask, Seth, is put on a ministry hat and ask this question. What do you think, sort of like when you look at your youth group and you have your front row kids who are committed to Jesus, your middle row, they're there because they're social relations, back row kids who are there with their arms folded going, I'm here because Mary's here. Other than that, you're stupid. We have all three of those, right? What do? We put a ministry hat on and say, what does a well-intentioned spiritual parent need from us to do the job that we're asking them to do without making them feel guilty? What do they need? And I would throw in things like they need encouragement. They need really simple, practical ideas that don't have a lot of theological guilt attached to them, but rationale without overloading them, clear opportunities to maybe practice it. Mm-hmm. So put your ministry hat on and ask, what does a person who's interested in spiritual things but feels inadequate to do them the way that these more mature, quote, mature people do? Then you'll start asking a whole set of questions that I think will help you identify them, understand them, be compassionate about them, and then start getting creative as what you can do. So your email might be a different one. If you've never prayed around the dining room table, you might want to read this is your subject versus, 8 devotionals to share with your kids tonight. Think using your language, your image, your experience, because you do that with kids who aren't all that interested, but you still know how to build relationships with them, support them. And the last one is, what do you do with the drop off? Well, those people still love their kids. So go after them in the way. What do they love? What are they concerned about? Find out what they're interested in. They may come to a workshop on the risks of social media and technology, but they won't come to the one on 5 ways to raise a disciple, because that's not where they are. But they are there because there's some. So ask a ministry question. What does that parent need as to be a good parent? What could we do to help them and encourage them and support them? I always give a little simple tip. I think with the dropout parents, find someone who's got the ministry of parking lots. And you can't send your creepy one out there, but somebody who's winsome, who's good with people who don't feel comfortable in church. And they might, so when the door opens and Sarah gets out, they're out there and going, Sarah, great, I'm glad you're here. Oh, by the way, you're Sarah's dad? Yeah. Hey, we love having Sarah here. What's your name? Bill. Bill, I'm Tiger. Hey, thanks for dropping her off. We love having her here. So if you have any questions along the way, anyway, you just do something. And if that person's out there over the course of time, you never know. Trust that process, because you're asking a ministry question. What does a person who's scared to come in the building, what are they, why is that? What are the barriers? What could we do? How do we send someone out to say, hey, you're welcome? Because they won't read the email about the devotional. So that's real quick. Does that make sense?
That's great.
So, great question, Seth. Get your ministry hat on. Let's see what, and if you come up with a really good idea, tell me and I'll steal
it. Oh, great. Thank you, Tiger. I love those thoughts, those reminders. I think all of us are walking away with something that we can easily start practicing or having conversations around, even just to be thinking about how we can be more intentional with these as we think through our coming time with youth. I wanted to let you know I put 2 links in the chat. The first is just a really quick form for feedback. We want to tailor all of these to the things you're actually wondering about, the things you actually want tools and resources for as we start to think of next year and what we have. We want your voice in that. And so please just take 1 second and fill out. It's only like 5 questions. So we would love your feedback there. The second is our next webinar coming up on June 22nd. There was a date change from when it was initially published, so just keep that in mind. But we're going to be talking about strategic student ministry. So I get to lead that conversation, and we're going to get really, really practical. Our youth group times, our student ministry nights just kind of keep coming. And if we're not intentional with it, we end up just kind of going with the flow a little too much. And so we're going to talk about really practical strategies that you can lean into to make it easier for you to get more intentional with these principles. So I encourage you to come, especially if you are a part-time or volunteer person. These strategies will help you leverage your time well and get intentional about that without adding too much to your plate. So we would love that. Registration is open. The recording will be available later today. If you're joining us with a community partner network code, all of our recorded webinars are available to you on our resources page. And so I'll drop that link in there too, but you can use that same code for free training on everything we've done this year. They're all recorded. They live on our website and you can go back as many times as you want to watch it. The best thing, my favorite thing, is you can share it with whoever you want to share it with. So if you think this would benefit the parents in your youth group, send it to them with the code. If you want to send it to your volunteers, send it to your volunteers. You think the cashier at Target would love it? Send it to the cashier at Target. We just want the most amount of people equipped for effective ministry to the next generation. So that is on our resources tab at youthministryconsultants.org. So that is our time today. I hope it was encouraging for you. Tiger, if you'd like to pray for us as we end today, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming. And for those who came in late, grab the recording. And the feedback on eval really is something we believe in. It helps us. It also helps, we have some donors who really believe in quality evaluation of what we're doing. So it helps us a lot. So let me pray for you. God, we're grateful for everyone here who's watching now and on the recording and the role they play in the spiritual lives of parents and kids. It's messy, it's confusing, it's complicated. God, give each of us an increased clarity that we're there to help build faith in the next generation and that help kids come to know a truth that can set them free. We're grateful for every person here and the opportunity to have this conversation in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm honored to be a part of this. So thanks so much for what you do in the role of helping kids grow spiritually. So thanks so much.